welcome to Unlimited Parenting, where we discuss what it's like having children with disabilities or special healthcare needs. My name is Allison, and I am so excited to be joined today by speaker, podcast host, advocate, and author Jessica Fein to discuss her book, Breathtaking, a Memoir of Family, Dreams, and Broken Genes. Well, thank you so much for being here and taking time out of your day to share this story. We are Idaho Parents Unlimited, so we are over here in Idaho, and we are very excited to have a unique perspective from someone who is parenting a child with a disability on the East Coast. So I wanted to start by asking you if you could describe a little bit about Dalia's diagnosis before I get into some other questions.
Absolutely. So my daughter, Dalia, was diagnosed at age 5 with Murph syndrome, which is an ultra-rare kind of mitochondrial disease. And at the time, what made me seek a diagnosis was feeling like, something's not quite right. And I think as parents, a lot of us have this niggling feeling. Something just seems a bit off. And, I tried to make sure that I wasn't comparing her too much to her sibling or helicoptering or doing all of those things. And yet I just felt like, her walking was a bit wobbly. Her speech was garbled. There were things. So I reached out. We have Here Early Intervention, which will come to your house for free before age 3 and do the assessment and say whether or not there's, some kind of therapy called for. And they said, no, she's fine. And a few months passed, and I had them come out again. And a few months passed. And now they were like, oh, God, not her again when I would call, right? Yeah. But I had them come out a third time. And each time they said, she's on the lower end of average, but she will catch up. And Dalia was adopted from another country, from Guatemala. So there was also this question mark of maybe she's a bit behind because, of what happened in her early days or prenatal. We just didn't have really very much information to go on. And then came the first diagnosis, which was actually hearing loss. And that was a mild to moderate hearing loss, and it was unexplained. Okay. And I will say for your families and your listeners, it's interesting how, first of all, one diagnosis can lead to another, can lead to another, can lead to another, but also how, as parents, we become so much more comfortable with things that at first might cause, such discomfort. So for me, the hearing loss was it was mild to moderate. It could be fixed with hearing aids. That was the diagnosis. And I thought the sky was falling. And I look back at the me of then, and I'm like, okay, honey, it could be, and it would be a lot worse. But I understand that at that time, that was really devastating. In any event, because that hearing loss was unexplained, we were sent for genetic testing. We didn't know about the genes. We didn't know about why she had the hearing loss. So we were sent for genetic testing. And, I know so many families where their diagnostic odyssey is years and where they have to fight for genetic testing. And that just simply wasn't the case for us, because once she went for genetic testing, the diagnosis was immediate, which is she's got this degenerative disease, this mitochondrial disease. And I knew nothing. I knew nothing about what mitochondria were. I didn't know what they did, why we needed them, okay, her mitochondria don't work. Let's do a mitochondrial transplant. I didn't understand what it meant. And I didn't really understand what a degenerative disease meant. I understood the word, but I didn't understand what the trajectory would be, what it would look like. And in fact, they couldn't really tell us because it's a rare disease. So when we talk about special needs and disability, I really, from the parent perspective, went through the whole gamut from something that was correctable and kind of, she wore hearing aids, but you couldn't really see it, all the way through to Dalia losing the ability altogether to walk and being in a wheelchair, and losing the ability ultimately to speak and to eat and to breathe without the assistance of a ventilator. And it was so slow. And also it seems so fast. I will share with your listeners that Dalia died 1 week after her 17th birthday. So this was a journey of 12 years of different kinds of disabilities, different kinds of intensity, different kinds of treatments, of therapies. And so that's a bit of the story.
Is this compounded by the fact that it was an adoption? Did you know much about her biological parents' medical history before that, or was there not a lot of knowledge on that?
There wasn't a lot of knowledge on that, and I will tell you 2 quick stories about that. Number one, we actually met Dalia's birth mother. I have adopted 3 children, and I've only met one of the birth mothers, and it was Dalia's. And what's so interesting about that is we met her, and she was vibrant and healthy seeming and beautiful and engaging, and we had a beautiful interaction. 2 years later, we were back in Guatemala and we met up with her again. And now she was clearly very ill. She needed assistance walking and she had lost a tremendous amount of weight and she was slight to begin with. Nobody knew what was wrong with her. And in fact, it would be years before we figured it out, because once we knew that Dalia had Murph syndrome, it was a virtual certainty that her mother did too. It is a maternally inherited disease almost all the time. And so that was and this whole issue is part of what I talk about in my book, because we, of course, then wanted to find Dalia's birth mother. We were fairly certain she did not have a diagnosis. It's very rare and difficult typically to diagnose, even here in Boston, which is some people will say the medical capital of the world. We were fairly certain she didn't have a diagnosis. We were not unable to locate her, and we were never able to be part of her journey in the way we would have been eager to had she wanted that. The other piece about it is, you asked, did we know anything? And we didn't, about Dalia's early care, about her health history. And I will tell you, and I will share with the listeners, that is one of the things in this world that I am most grateful for, that we didn't know. And the reason why is quite simple. Had we known, had we found out that there was a little girl available for adoption who had an insidious, rare, degenerative disease, I would have said, well, wait for the next one on the list. I didn't raise my hand for this. And then I wouldn't have had my daughter, because there's no question Dalia was my daughter and I was her mother and we were meant to be together. So the fact that I didn't know was a real blessing. By the time she was diagnosed, she couldn't have been any more mine and I hers. I mean, so I'm glad I didn't know.
Thank you for being so refreshingly honest and candid about obviously a very sensitive topic, and one that carries a lot of weight for you personally and just potentially even for listeners. But hearing, it's very refreshing, your perspective. If I can I circle back to part of Dalia's care? Because one of the things that I really took away from your book, Breathtaking, is that you and your husband had these kind of distinct roles in Dalia's care, right? So yours was like a focus on advocacy and he was providing calm. And how did these complement each other? But then what challenges did you face on maintaining a united front? And I really think it's really a continuing theme throughout the book. Like even from the very beginning, when there's a story right at the very beginning where Dalia falls, and then you guys are taking her, or she's at school, she falls, you guys rush to the ER, and you talk about a dance of one of you being calm and the other one being the storm.
Yes. And I love this question. Thank you so much. So I will say, first of all, I like talking about it because I think that we tend to have an assumption that the mother is going to be the primary hands-on caregiver. I saw this over and over again when we'd be in the hospital, in the doctor's offices with at-home nurses. They look at the mother first. They'll say, well, mom, they expect the mom to be the one. In our case, there is no question that my husband was the better hands-on caregiver. And I am not saying that to put myself down. I am saying it because it's true. It was such intense medical care once Dalia had a tracheotomy, and he learned everything there was to learn. And there was some of it that was so intimidating and scary for me, and he took that on so that I didn't have to. And the flip side is we had in-home nursing. Dalia needed 24/7 eyes-on care. That was a lot of people coming in and out of the house. He couldn't have even told you the name of the nursing agency. I mean, I had spreadsheets. I had all of that. So, it was really, really great. And we were so fortunate that, first of all, there were two of us. I mean, I think about people going through this as single parent, and I have such compassion and admiration for what that must be like. But that we also were able to step up and step in different ways. And that scene that you're talking about, I think, is a really important one, because what we learned early on was that it was better for one of us to be petrified, devastated, freaking out at a time, right? Because if we twirled together in that worry and fear, we'd collapse. Much better for one of us to be in that place and the other one to be like, okay, I got this, And believe me, each of us had our times of freak out and despair and all the things, but we tried not to get into it at the same moment.
And then I think that the taking turns, allowing you to feel your feelings at the intensity that they are, and then coming back into yourself and being that calm. Do you think that because there's also a part in your story where you kind of talk about, and maybe I'm saying this wrong, but almost like a postpartum or like a ICU psychosis or something like that you experience. So how did that turn taking play into that experience?
Well, yes. So we spent, when Dalia turned 9, she actually turned 9 in the hospital. We were in the pediatric intensive care unit for 3 months. And my husband and I both had full-time jobs, and we had 2 other young children at home. Now, first of all, we were very, very, very fortunate that we were both able to keep our jobs and take leaves of absence, because I know a lot of families in the PICU where that was not the case. Now, that was one thing. But the other thing was we had 2 other kids at home. So what we did was we switched off every single night for 3 months. One of us would be home with the other 2 kids, and one of us would be in the hospital. And then we just switched. We were like we were not 2 ships who passed in the night. We were 2 ships who passed in the hallway of the ICU, because that was the only way we could do it over the course of 3 months.
I know a lot of families have, to a much lesser degree, a similar experience in the sense that in order to make childcare needs work, one parent will work in the morning and one parent will work at night. So it's very interesting to hear that from a perspective of a child who is in the hospital. And you talk about having your 2 other kids, Jonah and Theo, at home. And even there's a chapter, 2 Worlds, where you talk about navigating and managing, constant vigilance and then maintaining normalcy for your other 2 children. What are some of the strategies that you and your husband used when you were going back and forth through all of these different things, supporting Dalia, but then also giving them their childhood?
Yes, it's such a beautiful question. And also thank you for such a careful reading of the book. It became clear to us that we needed to try, to whatever extent possible, to give all 3 of the kids a childhood. Because even though we were in such an incredibly intense situation, even though we had nursing in the house and my daughter's room looked like an ICU room, this was their childhood. So there are ways that we created a life of joy and a life of meaning, even in the midst of these horrific circumstances for Dalia and for the other two kids. Your question was specifically about the others. And some of the ways we did that was by my husband and I splitting up the time that we spent with them. And what I mean by that is Dalia couldn't travel. And so I started to take the kids on vacation, the other two by myself. Wasn't something I would have ever really thought of I would do. And my husband did that once or twice as well. Even that being kind of the extreme is going on vacation, there could be something about taking them out to dinner or, having special dates, either mommy dates or daddy dates or, whatever, but really making sure to be deliberate about giving them the time that they needed. And I will tell you that they were suffering. And I will tell you that when we talk about special needs, we're not only talking about the very intense, unusual special needs that my daughter had, but we also had different kinds of needs with our other children. And I also will say that some of those other needs, which perhaps some of your listeners are experiencing with their children, some of those learning needs and emotional needs can be just as, if not more stressful than medical needs, just different.
I'll say that really resonates with me as a parent of 3 children who are all 3 autistic, and one has severe emotional behavioral disturbances. That they're all differing levels of support needs, but they all feel so intensely sometimes the same level of need. And it's not just there's no break, right? You're just vacillating between everyone's different needs. I'd like to talk a little bit about your faith and how that may have played a role, because you're Jewish, correct?
Yeah.
How did that faith help you through Dalia and all of your other children? And did that influence your perspective on suffering and resilience?
Oh, your questions are so good. I don't think that my religion necessarily, overtly impacted on my beliefs around suffering and resilience, but it may have been subconscious. And I will say that I never had an illusion that life is fair. I never had an illusion that life owed me anything. So there wasn't any railing against, why me? This isn't fair. I don't know if that comes from knowing historically about a lot of suffering. I think for me, it probably comes from losing my sister when I was 27 and she was 30. That was the pivotal switch in my life when I realized it's a little bit of a roulette wheel, that things happen that we could never expect, that we can't explain. And all of the losses I experienced after that one were really seen through the lens of that first loss. So, whether it was based on personal experience, whether it was based on having seen my parents go through the loss of a child with my sister, even though she was 30, it was a little bit different. But what our religion did play a part was in the community. And it was in Dalia's love for that community and primarily for the music. The music in the religious services was something that just Dalia loved and she could respond to in such a joyous way. And that brought all of us joy. So sitting in the front row of a service where there's guitar and there's drums and the person who's playing the guitar brings it over to Dalia and lets her do some strumming, and she can't move anything but her shoulders and she's dancing with her shoulders and everybody's finding joy in her joy. And that's a gorgeous thing too, right? She's emanating joy, which means other people are feeling joyful and throwing that joy back at her. And so that was a beautiful, virtuous circle. The other thing is making the decision to give Dalia a bat mitzvah, which is the Jewish rite of passage for a 13-year-old or 12-year-old. And that was a really, really tough decision because the premise is that you can chant this blessing, and Dalia couldn't speak. She couldn't walk, and figuring out how to do that and really coming from a place of let's focus on what Dalia can do rather than what she can't. And boy, learning that message was powerful. And it's something that I use today, not just with kids, but when we think about people we're encountering and understanding that there are things people can do and things they can't, and what's going to be our starting point in that interaction.
And I appreciate that, because music really can be a language when maybe people don't have the ability to speak verbally. So that sense of community, and including her with the strumming of the guitar, and you talk in your book about your mom playing the piano and people gathering around, right? And that sense of, regardless of maybe what Dalia's abilities were, she was included no matter what.
Oh, yeah.
In every space that she was in your faith, in family, in everything. So I appreciate you sharing that experience. I also wanted to ask questions about decision-making when it came to Dalia's education, because that is also very unique in her situation, because she wasn't just an individual potentially with a developmental disability. She also had complex special healthcare needs, right? So there's a section in your book where you talk about the Kennedy Day School, and you had some reservations, and then ultimately you did. So can you tell more about what was that process like for being a parent of a child with special healthcare needs that were so complex?
Yes, absolutely. So I call, by the way, the Kennedy Day School the best decision I never made, because I rallied against it. I did not want Dalia pulled out of the public schools. And it's such an interesting journey, because so many people are on the opposite side, trying to get their children out of the public schools and into a specialized school. And that was not our case. So when Dalia's medical needs really became intense, that's when she had a tracheotomy and was ventilator dependent. And at the time she was in public school, she had a full-time aide. She had had an aide for a while because she had all of these kind of learning needs. And we started sending her to school with a private nurse who would take care of all of her medical needs. And so she had our private nurse that would go with her, and she had a one-on-one aide provided by the school. And the school came to us and said, we need to explore other options for her. And they started off, by the way, of saying it in a very much like, we're just going to explore, we're just going to look into it, we're going to all be in this together. That wasn't really the case. The subtext was, Dalia can't stay in this school. Well, I wasn't having it, because I wanted Dalia to stay in the school where she knew people, where people knew her, where people celebrated her in our community. That was what I wanted. And they said, well, you need to go to look at these 8 schools. And I went to them, and it's, all in the book. I won't go into the details, but I was devastated and horrified and just didn't see Dalia in those schools. So we decided to fight the school system, and that didn't go very well. Ultimately, what they ended up saying to us is, look, we got all the way to mediation, and we didn't go to trial, because what they said to us was, look, no judge is going to find a school that says, we do not believe we can keep your child safe, and we're willing to pay huge amounts of money, the school system, to send her to a specialized school. No judge is going to say, no, you got to keep her, right? That's not going to happen. And so ultimately we realized we didn't have a choice. And so reluctantly we moved her. And it is one of the things that I am so grateful that I didn't have a choice about, because the Kennedy Day School was the perfect place for her. Especially, her disease continued to progress. The people there were so skilled and beautiful people who really, really talk about focusing on what a kid can do and not what they can't. And Dalia was surrounded by other people who had varying needs. I mean, some like hers, some more intense, some less intense, but it didn't matter. And the school was equipped to deal with all of it. And the school was equipped to figure out how these kids could do things that no way they could have done in a mainstream environment. I mean, it was such a perfect, beautiful place for her. And I'm so grateful to every single person associated with that school and who works at that school, and so glad that people knew better than I did.
I think that's real. Again, another really powerful part of this story, because, in part of our work as a parent training and information center, we assist and provide resources to parents when they are having disputes with their school, just like you did. And, we're giving, parents what they can expect when they go into mediation. And then it is really hard when you get told, no, this is your only option. But to hear from a parent who faced their only option. Dalia went to it and you loved it and you're grateful for that experience. I think it's just a really refreshing perspective that we as Parent Training Information Center, we don't get to hear that very often. And I think it's really powerful for other parents to hear too. But at the end of the day, I'm really glad that the Kennedy Day School did work out and she did see benefit from that.
Yes.
I do also want to touch on another part of the book about Dalia being involved in that drug trial, and that her inclusion in that took a lot of creativity and persistence.
Yeah.
What lessons did you learn from that about like advocacy in the healthcare system?
Yeah, I fought and fought and fought to get Dalia to find a clinical trial, then to get Dalia into a clinical trial. I mean, this took years. And then finally she got accepted. And first of all, I completely had a fantasy in my mind. I mean, this was a clinical trial being the operative word. And I was like, this is a cure. She's going to be triple and and we were ready. I mean, it was taking place. We're outside of Boston. It was in DC and we were ready. We had the plane tickets. We had everything. We were going to go every month, the whole thing. And at the last minute, she was pulled from the study because she was deemed not healthy enough to participate. And so I learned a lot there. I learned that there are some things that no matter how we as parents, no matter how hard we try, how much we educate ourselves, how much research we do, there are some times when it's not going to go our way. I mean, I offered everything. I'll drive her. I'll do this. I'll do that. No. Ultimately, I don't want to, give away too much, but ultimately she did get into that same trial, moved to Boston and, changed names, but it was the same drug. And near the end, we did get her into that trial. Mostly it was going to be something that would hopefully provide some information for other children. It was quite Dalia's disease was quite progressed by that point. But boy, I will tell you, in that case, it didn't work out. But advocacy, there is so much I learned and so much that did work out. And so I feel like every day was advocating for one thing or another. And I will just say, one of the beautiful things I learned, it happened twice, where I advocated and advocated for something to happen. And then when it happened, it wasn't only for Dalia, it ended up being able to be for a whole slew of children. And so that was really gratifying.
That Dalia's just even at the base level, just her existence supported so many other children.
Yeah.
And not even just that, but your advocacy efforts and all of these things supported so many other children. So huge shout out to you as well. And, your husband as a supporting actor.
Yes. And
in the book, you also mentioned that Dalia's mission was to embody joy and love, kind of despite everything. How is that in her memory inspiring you and your family and her loved ones today?
Oh, in every single way, because I think about that all the time. And I think about, my goodness, this human being who had everything taken away from her and had every reason to be angry and to be bitter and to not want to even get out of bed. She just wanted to go out there and be her sweet, kind, joyous self. And if she could do that, then boy, I need to make sure that I'm doing that in her honor. And one of the ways is working with Mito Action to run a program called Dalia's Wish, where we send children and their families to Give Kids the World Village and to Disney to have a week of joy and to have those memories and to create that for the whole family, not just for the child, but for the parents and the siblings too.
Do your other children now have any words or anything that they want other siblings of children with special healthcare needs to know, or how are they navigating this?
It's hard and they're very different from each other, and I think they look at it as they mature through different sets of lenses. I think both of them feel they have used this word, so I'm not putting words in their mouth. I think both of them felt she was their biggest teacher. They felt she was their biggest cheerleader. They feel very much that she is their sister to this day. I mean, they were really, really, really tight. I, as the mother, feel like they are more empathic, more compassionate, more inclusive, kinder people than most of the people I encounter. Maybe that has to do with other things, but I think to a certain extent it has to do with having the good fortune to be Dalia's siblings.
That's very sweet of them. I also want to ask, and this is probably more a question for me, but I hope that it also helps some of our listeners. What advice do you offer to someone who, like me, isn't going through this situation themselves, but wants to offer love and support to a friend who's going through the most extreme kind of hardship like you did? You are.
Okay, yeah, again, I love that question because I think we're so uncomfortable around it so much of the time that we either don't really show up or we do something like, hey, let me know if there's anything I can do. Well, when you say, let me know if there's anything I can do, what you're doing is you're putting the burden of figuring out what you can do on the person, right? So instead of saying, first of all, educating yourself. So educate yourself about whatever it is the child's diagnosis is. That goes a long way because the person doesn't want to describe it 100 million times a day. So that's number one. Number two, and all of it depends on what your relationship is, but there is a huge, huge, huge value in getting over your own discomfort and sitting with the person in their sadness or in their whatever emotion they're going through, being with them. Your presence means so much. Now, they may have really practical needs too. They may need, for example, somebody who's going to take the other kids out to ice cream because guess what? They can't do that right now because they're focused on the other kid, right? So maybe it's paying a special attention to the siblings. Maybe it's making a menu of things and saying, here, friend, I thought of like 10 things that might be useful. Just check off if there's anything here, taking your kids out to ice cream, taking your dog for a walk, mowing your lawn, taking you out to coffee, whatever the thing is, but just coming up with some ideas and giving those ideas to the friend. I could go on and on. I have articles about this. People should go to my website. I've got articles. I've got the whole thing because I'm so passionate about this topic. And mostly it's because, I had no clue. I didn't know what to do or what to say, not only when people are suffering, but, through grief, through loss, through sickness. I had no idea. And I think that as a society, we have a lot to learn. And sometimes we just only learn because we've went through it like I did. And so then I want to share it with other people.
I thank you. I appreciate that. And I love the idea of creating a menu and giving it to someone and saying, just check off 3-5 things from this that I can do to help you, because people want to support, and oftentimes will say well-meaning things that just aren't the right thing at the right time. And just hearing these concrete examples of what someone like I could do to help support someone is going to be really, really meaningful. And I think another thing people can do if they want to know more is to read this beautiful book, Breathtaking, in honor of your sweet daughter and your other children. And I just want to say that I loved this book. And there were times where it really was a really hard read. And it's just it turns into these beautiful, moving moments. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us, because it had to have been beyond the pale of impossible to live it and then have your other children, and then you're working and your husband's working and you're writing this book, but yet you still took Dalia's joy and her experience to give you the fuel for the fire to share it with the world. So I'm just beyond grateful that I got the opportunity to read this book, and we are gonna, share a link to the book in the description. We'll obviously very much share your website. And I just want to say, a huge thank you for your time and taking this just heart-wrenching experience and turning it into something that we can all benefit from.
Thank you so much. And, I will say, because I know a lot of your listeners are going through challenges, and if people want to read this book as part of their book club, I'm happy to come in. And I mean, I know you're far away, but listeners presumably are everywhere, whether that's Zooming in or, if it's local to me by any chance, to be part of conversations. Because if people are interested in having these conversations and reading the book together, I'm finding that the book club conversations are something people are getting a lot out of. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I know of actually quite a few people who would be wanting to take advantage of it, who are avid readers, much like yourself, because books and quotes and letters that family members have written are also very much a theme. But I am out here giving away the whole book, so I will try to rein it in. But
Thank you so much.
Breathtaking, absolutely a beautiful book. I hope everyone reads it. Jessica, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone out there, for listening in. And know that if you are in Idaho or planning on moving to Idaho and have questions on systems or services for children with disabilities, please consider reaching out to us on our website at IPUL Idaho. That's IPUL Idaho.org, or by calling us at 208-342-5884. Be sure to tune in next time. Until then, this has been Unlimited Parenting.
Thanks for listening.